Hi, everyone. My name is Daniel Marvin. I'm a partner at Kennedy's in the cybersecurity and data privacy and protection practice. My practice involves the entire life cycle of data security and privacy, including helping organizations work on the legal and cyber infrastructure by drafting appropriate policies and procedures, including employee policies, written information security programs, incident response plans, and third-party vendor policies. I also assist clients in incident and data breach response, as well as any regulatory investigations or litigations that may arise from an incident, including the defense of class action litigations. Today, we're going to talk about the basics of cybersecurity and data privacy law. By basics, I mean that we're going to go over the elements of the law in the United States, which concerns three basic categories. The first is that there are laws that concern how organizations need to protect their data and the personal information of their employees and customers. Next, there are laws that involve how organizations are to notify individuals in the event of a data incident or breach that involves their personal information. Finally, there's been a trend in the United States over the past few years and really throughout the world in the enactment of laws that are designed to give individuals more control over what organizations do with the data they possess. So those are the three basic categories we're going to talk about today. Now, as far as the legal landscape in the US, there is no single federal law regulating the collection and use of personal data or rules governing breach notification. There's been many attempts to introduce legislation in Congress, and they have all stalled. So organizations are left with a patchwork of state laws as well as federal laws that are industry specific. A few of those which we will briefly discuss today are HIPAA and the GLBA. But there are also industry guidelines and other regulatory guidelines developed by governmental agencies that are part of self-regulatory frameworks and best practices, and we'll be discussing those today as well. In addition, all of the states in the US, as well as the District of Columbia and Puerto Rico, have breach notification statutes, which require the notification of residents in the event of a breach. And many states also have their own state-specific data protection laws that require companies that are in the possession of personal information, or PII as it's called, of state residents to safeguard that information. I always begin these talks with a discussion of the Nist Standards, or the National Institute of Standards and Technology. Nist is an agency of the Department of Commerce, and years ago they put out cybersecurity guidelines for critical infrastructure in the United States, and eventually adopted those guidelines for small businesses, and they really apply to all businesses. And these guidelines, which you can find on the Nist website, provide basic advice on how companies can secure the information systems as well as networks. And as we go forward with today's presentations, you'll see how the Nist framework is relevant towards the statutory framework that's been set up in the US. So the Nist framework has 5 basic elements: identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. All of these elements deal with risks. How can organizations identify risks, protect against risks, detect them, respond to them, and of course, recover to them? So what are the elements of these things? Well, first is to identify risks, and that's going to be different for every organization, dependent on its size, the nature of its business, and the type of information it collects. But a risk assessment is a vital and necessary element of any cybersecurity program. Organizations need to identify what information they store, what its value is. They need to identify their threats and vulnerabilities, where their systems may be weak. And it's also important, of course, to know where their systems are strong. Organizations need to identify if access to databases containing PII is limited to just those employees with the business need. And this is an area where many organizations have gotten into the trouble by allowing access to information to employees who don't necessarily need it in their everyday work.